Hello, everybody. I'm Frank Gruber. I'm the co-CEO of Establish, the company that powers the Startup of the Year program and the summit that you're currently attending. I'm also an investor in Established Ventures and Next Gen Venture Partners as we look for interesting companies all over the country. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Mike Evans. I met Mike very early in the Grubhub story in Sweet Home Chicago, my hometown and state of Illinois. And he was showcasing at one of our early tech cocktail events, which was a mixer event we pulled together. It turned into a big company called Tech.co. And long story short, Grubhub turned into a humongous company as well. So I'm super excited. I remember clearly having Mike and Matt showcasing, with their laptops at this crowded, and probably at the time still smoky Lincoln Park bar, and back in 2006. And it's obviously great to see the trajectory of a company like Grubhub. So really excited to have Mike Evans here. He's the co-founder of Grubhub. He took the company through 5 rounds of venture funding, did a few acquisitions, took it to IPO. He then decided to ride his bike across the country, which is amazing, and then started another company. Started up again with a company called Fixer, which is an on-demand handy person service. And he's also a soon-to-be published author. He's got a book coming out soon called Hangry. It's all about the journeys and lessons learned from starting Grubhub and Fixer and biking across the country. So super excited to have Mike here. Mike, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Frank. I remember that the tech cocktail event. It was right. Actually, you said Sweet Home Chicago. I remember it was right across the street from Wrigley Field.
Yeah,
we had the event. Yeah.
Yep. It was a long many moons ago, but it was it's definitely cemented in my memory. It was those early days, and there was a lot of excitement. So let's just dive in. I met you then. Grubhub started just a little before then. Can you share, why you started Grubhub and that story?
Yeah. So I started Grubhub. I was working at a company called Classified Ventures. They have a few websites. Apartments.com is probably the most well known. And in the ripeness of my 25 years of age, I decided that working for other people really sucks. And so I was looking for something to do, some sort of interesting thing to do. The idea that I came up with was a neighborhood guide for delivery. At the time, if you wanted to find a pizza, you go on the yellow pages, which is like listed alphabetically, doesn't have delivery boundaries, and you have no idea if the restaurants are any good. And so I started by making a restaurant delivery guide, did that for a few months before, and it was really just a hobby to start before it became a business. And so the combination of selling the first restaurant and kind of hating working for other people, I quit my job after a $140 check from Charming Walk.
Wow, that's crazy. And I remember everyone had that like drawer in their apartment or condo or home where it was like all the menus, right? Especially in Chicago, I felt like there were a million menus and you had to try to figure out which one you're going to order from and then call them. And so you definitely
really organized people would have them in a folder, but I don't know who those
right.
people are.
I had the drawer, did not have the folder, but definitely felt that pain and interesting. I mean, so when was that? What year was that?
So that was in 2002 that I started writing the website, and then I think that I went full time in. I think it was 2003. I'd have to look at my notes, but I think it was spring 2003. Might have been 2004. I've got it written down somewhere.
Yeah, right. It all probably blurs together at this point. So so that was 2003. 2006 is when I first met you through the showcase. Actually, ironically, at the time, I was actually working prior to that at Apartments.com. I was a product for them as well. So, Classified Ventures alumni here. So reunion right now. But so good stuff. Kind of similar in Chicago. That was one of the kind of the places that internet stuff was happening, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so let's dive a little bit deeper. So getting that first sale, what was that like, and what made you think, oh gosh, this is enough? That $140 is enough to quit my job and do this?
Yeah. So the first sale, credit where credit's due. Matt made the first sale, not me. I had made the website, spent about 6-7 months working on it, and then Matt was real interested in what I was doing, and I gave him the job. I said, well, go sell a restaurant if you want to do this with me. And he did. He took like a 4-hour lunch break and went and sold the first restaurant. And when he came back, I was thinking about it, and I was like, if I could sell like 4 or 5 restaurants a week, and I sold them like on a 3-month subscription package of like $100 a month, if I did that like every week for 3 months, and then I got to the point where on month 4, I had renewals that were happening. I could sell new restaurants on top of that. I might be able to pay myself enough to like eat ramen and pay rent. I couldn't pay my school debt, but whatever, like I was gonna be paying that till 2036 anyway.
Right.
So like it didn't matter. Man, and so I was like, yeah, like my wife just finished law school and we've got 250 grand in school debt and I got a check for 140 bucks. Yeah, I'll quit my job. Like, why not? Like, of course that's a good idea. And so Matt and I, we each put 11 grand into the company. We got our bonus from Classified Ventures. They had this crazy bonus program where like,
Yep, I remember that.
Like you had to wait till April to get it, but it was like 20% of your salary. So we each put 11 grand or maybe 15%, 11 grand into the business, which gave me enough cash to make it 3 months while paying myself about a $40,000 a year salary. And in that first 3 months, I just started hustling, started selling restaurants. I'd sell restaurants during the day and I code at night. And in the years intervening in between the two, I kind of forgot how hard that was. But as I've been writing this book, Hangry, and talking about what it was like, I've been remembering what it was like. And I remember going down Clark Street in Andersonville and going into JB's Deli and Kalo Restaurant and Andy's and Reza's and Svea and all these restaurants that had been around for like 30 years, and just getting kicked out of every one of them. Like before I could even I didn't get past the host or the hostess or the waiter or the waitress. So I got a selling. I went to Borders and I got selling for dummies.
Oh, wow, no way.
Yeah, and it had a few really good tips. One of them was ask for the money. If it's just a chat, if you don't ask for the money, it's just a friendly chat. To be a sale, you have to ask for money at some point in the conversation. And I remember the other point that was in there was once you sell somebody, stop selling. The only thing you can really do is talk them out of the sale at that point. So those were great, but that wasn't the problem I was having. The problem I was having is I wasn't even talking to the decision maker. And there was this cute little story in there about like when you're trying, it was trying to make an analogy about when you're trying to sell somebody on Xerox copy machines, because that's the era that we were in.
Right. Yeah. So I was thinking, wow, yeah, that's not dated at all.
Cute story that talked about, if you were going to try and sell a restaurant, you wouldn't walk in through the front door because you just get stopped by the waitress. You got to walk into the alley. And it was meant as a metaphor. And I was like, oh, wait, no, that's literal advice. Like I actually have to walk down the alley behind Clark Street and walk in the door. And so I did it. And I was scared. It was like nerve wracking to open the back door of a restaurant from the alley and walk in. And the first couple of restaurants I walked into, I got kicked out kind of aggressively.
Oh, wow.
But the fourth one, I signed up. And the fifth one, I signed up. And so I started to realize that there's an element to just being bold and just taking rejection in stride and starting to sign up restaurants. And so that was how it started. I signed up the first 100 restaurants that way, just hustling.
Wow, that's great. And so that was the early traction. And then, you raised funding in, what was it, 06? What was that like? As I remember when you guys came through Tech Cocktail to showcase, at that point, you were trying to raise a little funding, and the market in Chicago at the time was really rough from an investment perspective.
Yeah. And there was a lot to that story, right? You fast forward 3 years and we've got some traction. We built online ordering and we had won the University of Chicago's New Venture Challenge, and we still couldn't get investment, right? We were making around, I think it was right under $400,000 a year at that point, profitable. We bootstrapped to that point. And so you think the world was our oyster, right?
Yeah.
And maybe if we had the right exposure to investors, that would have made sense. And actually the other thing we even had at the time is Chuck Templeton had come on as an advisor at that point. And he was the founder of OpenTable, right? So we sort of have all these things going for us. And it took us a year of really working at it to raise financing. And we got a deal from a couple investors, a syndicate, and then that fell apart. And one of the members of the syndicate stepped up finally. And another 4 months later, we raised $1.1 million in 2 tranches.
Wow.
And we are and on a pretty terrible valuation. But we were already profitable. We were already making a pile of money. But then the fact that we were profitable meant that the $1.1 million that we raised, we were able to get into 4 markets on just that amount of cash, and then be profitable again at the end of that.
Right, because you had built a business. You had already built a business. So it was the
right time. If you're paying attention to the story, pretty early on, we were selling restaurants before we had online ordering. We sold on a subscription model, and in fact, that first 100 restaurants that signed up, I realized somewhere around restaurant number 10 that going in with either a laptop or even printouts of what the delivery guide looked like. I mean, that's literally what I did. Those things were somewhat more effective when I was showing showing the restaurateur like how this would benefit them and how they had a need that I could meet. But actually, it turned out to be way more effective for me to just say, look, you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. Just take a chance on me and see if it works. Like,
Right.
just
What's
sign
there
up
to
for
lose?
months. And my close rate on that line was like 75%. And the close rate on like the features of the website was like 50%. So I stopped selling the product and I just started selling myself for that first 100 restaurants anyway. And that's how we got the early traction.
Yeah. I mean, what you just honed in on is relationships, right? Like you honed in on a relationship with a person is actually more important than the features on a cool website.
Yeah, that was absolutely true. Now, repeat purchases and longtime customers, the product has to work, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, that's what we learned through 2006, 2007. We raised that financing in late 2006, and in 2 years later, we raised another round of financing, and we were in 11 or 14 markets 2 years later, on $3 million of investment.
That's amazing. So let's keep moving here with so you got that round of funding that helped. I think I wanted to hone back into the fact that you basically, a lot of times right now, people are raising on ideas, right? And you had raised on a product that you had built and actually proven with bootstrapping. And I think that's a huge differentiator for you. And I don't know, what do you think about some of the things that are happening out there in the world with investment with, when you haven't just an idea and you're trying to raise like on a huge valuation?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's not like a simple answer to that question, right? One of the challenges of bootstrapping is that you pretty much have to be the technical co-founder. You can't hire somebody to do that and then bootstrap on it, right? And so I wrote the software myself, and so I was taking, in some sense, the investment that I had was I went to MIT, I got a master's degree in computer science, and then I was able to write the code, right? And not everybody can do that. And so I had sort of pre-invested in myself to be able to do that in some sense. And that's why I had $250,000 in school debt. So arguably that was the investment, right? Maybe I didn't actually bootstrap, I just had loans.
Yeah.
But I am a big fan of, as early in the process as possible, turn it from a hobby into a business. People ask this question of, they do this thing called market research, which is total bullshit, where they ask potential customers, would you buy this thing? And you know what everybody says? Yes, I would buy this thing. You know what people don't say yes to? Will you buy this thing right now? Like right now, show me the money.
Yeah.
And getting a yes to that second question is not only harder, but it's a lot more valuable than would you buy this thing? As an aside, it's the same reason that NPS is total bullshit. Like, why would you ask somebody if they would refer you to a friend, as opposed to asking somebody to refer you to a friend? Like, the second thing is really valuable. The first thing is just a vanity metric.
Right, totally. So there's a lot of vanity metrics out there, and we can talk about it a little bit later. Let's keep moving ahead with the Grubhub story. So you guys raised that first couple rounds. You ended up raising 5 rounds. Where do you want to dive in? What are some memory points there of like what it was like to, raise those multiple rounds? How did that make you guys feel as founders? What was that whole journey like?
Yeah, there were a couple of key points between the second round of financing and the first big round of financing. The first 2 rounds we did were $1 million and $2 million respectively, and then the next round was $11 million, and we eventually closed from Benchmark. And in the interim, as we grew, we were in 14 cities, we were profitable, we were growing at around 80% year over year. Our cost per acquisitions were good, our lifetime value of customers were good. We were able to sign up restaurants pretty fast. We were getting to the point where we had 15 to 20% of the restaurants in each of our markets signed up on the platform. And by the way, it was all independents, independent operator restaurants, no chains. The largest chain was Leona's in Chicago, which was 10 restaurants.
Wow.
So we had a lot of traction, right? And it looks like there was a huge addressable market, right, in the billions. And so we decided on Labor Day, the day after Labor Day, we got a meeting with Excel to go and pitch them in the Valley. We decided we were going to go to Silicon Valley, go down Sand Hill Road, and pitch the big firms.
Yes.
And like the combination of us getting that first meeting it was actually with the principal with a partner at Excel, not a principal, and which is, by the way, important. Not all people within an investment firm are the same. Talking to the principal is like 1/10 as valuable as talking to a partner. But I digress. So we had that first meeting set up. Chuck leaked leaked to everybody that he could find. He was on our board at that point, that we had this meeting with Excel and we were going to be in town.
Mm-hmm.
This crazy thing happened where it created this feeding frenzy. Like we somehow managed to create so much FOMO before showing up. Like there's this Chicago team coming to Silicon Valley, and they were like that. They were going to do this hot new thing that had somehow gotten overlooked. And we'd only had taken $3 million in capital, but we were making at that point probably in the 3 to 4 million a year in revenue profitably, right? So like that's a rare thing.
Yeah.
And so the Excel meeting that was like at 1 p.m. And then Sequoia wanted to meet us at 11 a.m. And then another firm wanted to meet us at 9. So then Benchmark said, well, we'll all show up at 7. And so like we had like 4, like it was crazy. It was like Benchmark, Sequoia, Battery, Excel, 7, 9, 11, and 1, right?
Wow.
Which is just nuts. Like that doesn't happen.
Right.
And so we went into the Benchmark meeting, and like, we had a very well rehearsed, very well thought through plan. And I played the quant, and Matt was kind of the salesman. And by the time the 15 minutes we were scheduled went like an hour and a half, right? Wow. And so like we knew we had them. In the final line of our presentation, an hour in, Matt's like, well, here's our bottom up analysis on total address, or I said, here's our bottom up analysis on total addressable market, and here's our top down. I'm really gutting into the quant numbers. And Matt just like interrupts me and says, the point is, it's crazy billions. And like the firm like cheers, like Benchmark is like clapping for us.
Oh my God.
Oh, I guess we just got investment. And so by the end of that, by 24 hours later, we had term sheets from Battery, Sequoia, and Benchmark, like simultaneously, which is very hard to pull off.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to choose between those 3 firms. Like we couldn't have made a wrong choice. We ended up going with Benchmark with $11 million. We pretty quickly did a follow-on round. There's a few firms in the Valley do follow-on rounds for sort of the top tier firms at a higher valuation. So we did the $11 million investment, and then 5 days later, we got an offer for $20 million investment at 4x the post that we had just closed.
Wow.
Because this other firm that did these follow-on investments, that was their model. Like we're never gonna get first look at any of these things, but if for 20% of their investments, we just do a crazy valuation and put some money in, we'll get in. And so interestingly, that $20 million, we never used it. Our bank account never dropped below $20 million.
Wow.
And so in some sense, it was great to have the backup, but in some other sense, it was unnecessary dilution.
Wow. That's amazing. And so when did the light go on that you're like, wow, this is a train to IPO?
So we raised another $50 million a little bit later to buy Campus Food, which at the time brought us from 50 markets into 200. And we started the IPO process right there. We knew pretty much right after that we had enough scale. We knew that we had to get to about 100 million in revenue. We were profitable again. Like after the dip, after the $11 million investment from Benchmark, we got back to profitability. And then we were profitable, by the way, forever. Like the company has never not been profitable after that. And it's just so weird. You see these Wall Street Journal articles about Grubhub being not profitable. I'm like, the company has had 1 quarter in the last 10 years.
Wow. So why is that? Why are they reporting it that way?
I don't know. I mean, you got to imagine the folks in the investor relations team at Grubhub are like,
what the heck?
We can't catch a break. Like, this is nuts. But the company's been profitable for a long time. And in fact, Wall Street values profit so little relative to revenue. The company has taken a strategy of acquiring other companies and having a really large development team and all of these things, just because the Wall Street doesn't value that profit, trying to build long-term competitive advantages. But that's post-IPO strategy. That's
right. Well, we blipped over the merger there with Seamless, which was a big competitor, right? That had to be interesting as well.
So we didn't look over it, because what we actually decided is we decided to do an IPO.
Yeah.
We filed confidentially. This was before the merger with Seamless.
Oh, gotcha.
We filed the merger confidentially. We went all the way through the SEC comment period. And at the time, you actually couldn't transmit the filing, the S1 to the SEC. You literally had to show up and do it
wow.
by paper. And so getting down to like a couple days away before the IPO, filing before the filing goes public, which would have started like a 90-day time window to do the roadshow and all this stuff before the actual IPO. And we're all the way down to that point, and there's this problem, and the problem is Seamless. Seamless is so big in Manhattan, but they weren't big anywhere else.
Right.
But all the investment bankers are in Manhattan, so the price of the company is going to really suffer as a result of our inability to break into the Manhattan market. Like we had cornered Brooklyn and the rest of New York, but just Manhattan, Seamless owned with like an iron fist. And Seamless didn't have any markets anywhere else. Like we had beat them everywhere else. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation had come up several times. Should we merge with them? And so by this point, we're down to a couple days before the IPO. And the first rule of negotiations is understand your BATNA. Understand what your best alternative to negotiated agreement. And when we're talking to Seamless, our BATNA is we're going to IPO in a few days, which it does not get better than that. And it literally got down to the point where the attorneys were sitting across from whatever building it is you file the paperwork at the SEC, like getting parking tickets while just sitting there with the paper in hand saying like, you agree or we file, right? Like it really did come down to like a game of chicken like that. And I say that because it was very adversarial to start. And the team at Seamless was amazing. And 6 months later, I was kind of like, man, we were kind of assholes to them. And actually, they were great people that had been trying to solve the same problem that we had been trying to solve for years. And our teams really got along really well. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the folks who were there. And so I tell this story like it was some triumphant thing, but actually we probably should have just like merged a year and a half earlier and spent our time pulling in the same direction instead of having this huge ego about the whole thing. So I tell this story like it's this triumph, but actually we could have done a lot better.
Right.
And so then I ran the merger of the two companies. And part of the reason I ran the merger is because I knew that at the IPO, that was the finish line for me. I knew I was going to get to the IPO and I was going to leave and go on and do my own thing. And because I was going to leave for the IPO, it's really easy for me to be the scapegoat for all the tough decisions that have to happen at the merger. Like you don't need two heads of marketing. You don't need two heads of business development. There was a whole office in Salt Lake City that was redundant with the customer service team that we had in Chicago. And like part of the reason you merge with another company is because there's inefficiencies in having some of those things doubled up. And so I became the scapegoat for all of the tough decisions because I knew I was going to be on the way out. Mm-hmm. I underestimated how emotionally difficult it's going to be for like hundreds of people to hate you. Right. And so I didn't do well with that, but we got through it, and the merger was a success. And then from that point we started the prep and ultimately went through an IPO.
Wow, really took one for the team. That's crazy. I mean, as far as taking being the fall guy basically for all those different changes.
I mean, I don't want to oversell like how selfless it was. There's something really satisfying about running a merger of a multi-thousand person company. Yeah, no, it's amazing triumph too. Like you IPO'd and then left, and that's amazing. I think that's a great story too. So I'm just saying that's I applaud you for that. So tell me, running that, what was that like? Like being that point person on the IPO, like what were the emotions there for you? Like being the first, you coded this thing to begin with. Yeah. So to be fair, I was the point person on the merger. The CFO, Adam, was the point person on the IPO. Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Something happened when I took that first round of investment, and Chuck told me this before we took the money. And he said, when you take an investor, it's not your company anymore. Even if you only sold a fraction of 1%, you are now running a company for shareholders. And make sure that you understand that before you take the money, or you're going to have buyer's remorse. And I did understand that. And so when I sold a chunk of the company for $1 million way back in 2006, I made the decision to not be as emotionally attached to it. It is now a business that I'm running. It's not my baby anymore. I'm going to run it well. And then every investment that happens in post that first decision was simply a matter of more degree, the thing that I had already done. Right. I was super happy that with the merger with Seamless, Grubhub got the brand name. That's not people talk about egos and M&A transactions a lot, and that was not a minor point for any of us at the Grubhub
I'm
team.
sure. Yeah.
And it wasn't a minor point for the folks at the Seamless team, but that team they weren't the founders, and so they probably didn't care quite as much as I did.
Right.
And so, you know, at every step along the way, I lost a little piece of it. But the other thing that happens along with the emotion of losing that piece is that I also lost a little bit more control about where the company was going.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fine up to a point. But what we had in 2006, which was a company that was very oriented towards the restaurateurs, and was really beneficial for small businesses. You know, that I don't know that that's still true as much as it was, you know, post IPO. And there's a lot of reasons for this, like the ownership, you know, the public owners of a company care about different things than private owners of a company, and they care about quarterly profits. And so a lot of the decisions that came post IPO really opened the company up for competition, specifically with DoorDash, and not as much with Uber Eats, but with DoorDash.
Right.
And that's because the company had to have ever increasing like take rates from restaurants to be able to guarantee the quarterly profit increase that public investors require. Mm-hmm. And I think that has made it less beneficial to restaurants. And the other thing that has happened since the IPO is that that it really has the company's really dived in on gig economy. And I think that the way that has been done really it requires both individuals who don't have a lot of means and municipalities to subsidize the profit of the company. And I think it's wrong. And so the thing that really bothers me about losing control is not that I lost control of my baby, but that my ability to influence the sort of doing good while doing well diminished to the point where now it's zero. I'm not a part of the company anymore. Well, it's not zero. I'm writing a book about this, right?
Right. Yeah, you're always have it in your heart.
Yeah. So, but by the time I left for the IPO, I was really angry at the way the company was headed, and not only angry from a big picture perspective. I was also just tired. Like I had worked, 80 to 100-hour weeks for a decade, and I was burnt out. Yeah. And I'd run the merger, and that had not been a popular thing to do. And so by the time I left, it was a little bit like, fuck this, I'm out. Like, and it's weird because it's hard to say like, oh, you just had this amazing experience. You IPO'd your company. Like it is the big success. But that is a mountaintop experience. But after the mountaintop experience comes the crash. Right. And a lot of people who sell their companies go through this, whether it's an IPO or an acquisition with an earnout or whatever. We're like, after that moment of like, yeah, I did it. It's like, oh,
what? No, you lose a little bit of yourself in that. I mean, I felt that way with Tech Cocktail and TechCo for a little while, and now we're back doing similar things. So I definitely hear you. It obviously wasn't as big of an IPO as what you guys did, but what did you do that to kind of get through that? I kind of know the answer to this, but I want you to tell me.
Yeah. So 29 days after the IPO was my final day at work, and I took that day to ride my bike I put my bike in the back of a rented van and drove to Virginia Beach from Chicago.
Yep.
To start a cross-country bike ride. So I rode my bicycle across the United States. And part of it was just to decompress. Part of it was to spend time listening and being present after the insanity that I had been through over the previous decade.
Right.
And part of it was just to, how do I put this? Just to make sure that I understood that my shit still smelled. That's probably the best way to put it. Like, there was some moment on the roadshow, the day before the IPO, where it literally was on a private jet going to New York City for the IPO, paid for by Citi, with like shrimp cocktail and lobster and steak tartare and Dom Perignon, and like it was insane. And then there was a moment 4 weeks later on the bike trip where a kid from like a local church in Kansas thought I was homeless and like offered me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so like
it's like lifestyles of rich and famous and like homeless. Yeah. I mean, that's where we are, right?
Yeah. And when you think about who, like, Citi bought me the one meal and this kid made this sandwich. And which of those, like, I don't want to, the work that Citi did was great and the people were really smart and really hardworking. But but the one entity is completely consumed with the acquisition of wealth. And the other person was trying to connect and help someone that they thought was in need. I was not in need. I had my mac and cheese. I was happy. It was
You're
fun.
good, yeah.
But the sentiment was really moving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think comparing and contrasting those two things, it was a little bit like, yeah, I don't want that former lifestyle. That way doesn't lead towards happiness, right?
Right.
And so, and the latter, well, I'm not sure that riding a bike across the country is a long-term happiness kind of thing either. It was kind of cool, but there was something to that. There was something to that moment that I was able to recapture a little bit of the naive, excited person that started Grubhub back when I was 25. 14 years later.
Wow, that's amazing. How long did that journey take?
About 3 months to ride across the country. And I got faster as I went, right? So I was real slow in the Appalachians. I went east to west, and I got way faster in the Great Plains. And by the time I got to the mountains, they weren't even hard. Like I was like, oh yeah, the Rockies, cool, that's fun. So it was great. Yeah.
And what is there anything we're going to dive into your next company here in a second? But was there anything, just kind of final thoughts about the country? You saw a lot of the country from the ground level with that, things like handing your kids offering your peanut butter sandwich to like little towns along the way. Is there anything glaring that kind of stood out?
Yeah, one of the things that really, so Chuck Templeton joined me for a week of it, who had been on the board and founded Open Table. And one of the things we were talking about in one of the towns in I think it must have been Montana, maybe Wyoming, was that there was a lot of towns, maybe 3 out of 4 towns, where you go through Main Street and a lot of the businesses are shuttered, and then as you pass the interstate, there's a Walmart and a Target, and like all the economic activities happening by the interstate in big box stores, and a lot of the vibrant downtown has closed up.
Right.
But then like 1 out of every 4 cities, you'd come to a Main Street, and it was just booming and vibrant, and there were parks, and there'd be people playing music, and there was community events, and there was something different. And some of those even still had the Walmart, but somehow the Walmart parking lot was half full.
Wow.
Right? There was something about like 25% of the communities that I rode through. And I came up with the theory as I went, which was there was somebody here who cared. There was somebody here, and you'd see their names and you'd see their pictures on the walls in like the little diner. Somebody who was like, I'm going to make sure that what we have here is special, and that it's preserved, and that we grow it. And the community rallied around that. 1 or 2 people would rally around that. And it was weird seeing that from Virginia to Oregon, like the same thing happening again and again and again, where there's like an example of an individual who put in the effort. And I found that really compelling. That was a part of what I ended up doing next.
Interesting. So let's dive right into that. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Let's go into your next company. So you created this latest company, Fixer.com, and maybe share a little bit about the backstory there. I mean, it almost feels like it should be the reverse. Like first you wanted to solve, grabbing a pizza, and obviously there's been the getting a ride from an app kind of situation. Why didn't this exist before?
Yeah. Fixer. So in the interim between the bike ride and my next company, I stayed home a couple years with my daughter, and that was great. I really wanted to spend that time with her, and then I started to think about, I have a lot of assets that are atrophying. My relationships with investors, my relationships with other people who I've worked with in the past, my skills, like I'm not sure that they're growing anymore. And so I started to get a desire to build something new. I had thinking a lot. I've been actually doing a lot of volunteering with the refugee organization, and then the refugee ban that Trump issued came through, and the number of people coming in really dried up. And so I was like, okay, well, I have to do something more strategic than just like putting bunk beds together for people. And so I started looking around for an industry where it was fragmented. There was a really bad consumer experience. Nothing was online, and construction really just fit those 3 things. And when I did like the root cause analysis, started doing some research, it turns out that the reason why the consumer experience is so bad in the construction industry, especially residential, is there just aren't enough workers to do the work. And so there's no need to innovate for the people the independent operators who are handymen. They do great work. They're great craftsmen. But there's no reason for them to answer the phone in the middle of the day. They're fine just letting them go to voicemail and calling back the people that they want to call back. So if you have a 2-hour job that you want done, it's not going to get done because the person who would do it is fully booked because the supply is constrained relative to the demand.
All right,
so
definitely found that.
101.
It's hard. It's hard to find a handyman or woman.
Yeah, and so the consumer experience is bad. It's hard to find a person. You can't find a handy woman. It's mostly handyman. Right. So there's a gender imbalance within the trades.
Yep.
And so macroeconomics 101 says if the supply is constrained and demand is high and increasing, price should be higher. And so we couldn't figure out why it cost $60 an hour to hire a handyman, but then you had to wait 6 weeks because like the obvious solution to that is like charge more, right? And hire an apprentice, right? Like that's in my mind, it's like, oh, we'll charge more, show up earlier and hire an apprentice because you're not doing anyone favors by just being overbooked and charging a lower price.
Right.
And so we decided that we were going to launch a W-2 employee-based company where we trained people from scratch and increased the supply. And so the company is we like to say it's a trade school disguised as a startup. We're not a trade school yet. We don't have our accreditation, but we're a training center. Mm-hmm. And so we train people from scratch to enter the trades. And then we have a great consumer experience where it's an app-based experience and there's really good customer service and we communicate with people instantly and like all of those things that you expect when you use your phone as a remote control these days. But it's backed by this supply of workers that we've trained ourselves. And so that's the business. I think it's going to be as big or bigger than Grubhub.
Wow. And so all those are employees then? They're not, so you're not leveraging that same gig economy that you just, don't agree with, it sounds like.
You know what blows my mind? That you're surprised. For 3,000 years, what we did was hire employees. And then
I think it's great. I'm just surprised because I know that.
I know everyone's surprised.
Yeah.
But like 10 years ago, suddenly gig economy became the thing.
Right.
And like we as a society collectively forgot that this is not the way things were done for a really, really long time. And it turns out hiring employees is great. And it's great because of retention and because it actually really matters that we show up on time. So it's important that we say to our employees, like, you have to be here on time. And you can't do that with 1099 contractors. So between training people and investing them and retaining them, a W-2 employee model is absolutely the right way to go.
Right.
And so that's the path we've taken.
No, that makes sense. And then I think the reason is that we all directly go to that gig economy approach is because there's been just a push in general for everyone to scale, right? And so they think, well, if you have to hire all these people, how are you going to scale quick enough and all that kind of stuff. So I think but I want to
challenge you on that.
Right.
Because like, why is gig economy scaling faster? What about gig economy? Because you still have to have a funnel of people that come into your hiring process. You still have to run the process. You still have to guarantee safety. Like filling out the paperwork to become a W-2 employee doesn't exactly take any longer. No. And like, I don't understand Uber's fight against the idea of, and Grubhub's fight against the idea of an employee model, because like it's not like you can hire people part-time. And I'm like, you can't? Don't a lot of companies hire?
They do, all the time. It's like,
so I'm not sure that the gig economy equals scale faster.
No.
I don't know that there's a logical basis for that argument.
No, there isn't. It's a perception. I think that's what I was getting at, is that the perception, just because that's the way it's been done for so long, and I'm saying so long, like 10 years maybe at the most. So I think it's a really interesting model, and I applaud you for doing it that way. And I really think that you've got something there. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means from a growth perspective, and where you're, what you're doing right now as far as you're focused, I think, mainly on Chicago. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're starting our market expansion in Q1 of next year. So we're right now we're in the ramp up to it because we've proven the model out here and are doing thousands of jobs here. And so it took a little bit longer to figure out the operational elements to it, make sure that the customer service element is good, and figure out the training center. And then, frankly, we figured out the training center, which was in person. Then COVID happened, and so we had to move the training center to a hybrid model. Right. And that took some time too, probably delayed our expansion a little bit. But provided everything goes well, in a couple months in January, Like as long as that goes well, from a COVID perspective, then we're going to be starting our market expansion.
Right. Yeah. Everything's a little bit up in the air this year. It's been a wild year, and COVID really threw a wrench in a lot of expansion and growth for companies. But it sounds like you're doing okay. So what with this company did you? Is it? I mean, it sounds like did you bootstrap it and kind of get it going that way, or what's been the model as far as how you
Hell no, I didn't bootstrap it. Hell no, I ain't gonna work that hard again.
Okay.
There was no reason for me to bootstrap it, because after a multi-billion-dollar IPO, like, investors take my calls, right? So
Yep.
it was pretty easy for us to raise cash. We actually raised a lot. We raised $10 million to go and have at this.
Yep.
And so, and part of it was I just wanted to start more quickly. It's a lot easier to start with a team of 7, who I've worked with in the past, and just go for it, than it would have been to bootstrap it, which takes more time. You have to do it a lot more carefully, a lot more methodically.
That makes sense. Okay. And is this company, you mentioned you think it's going to be bigger than Grubhub? Is your path like, keep going to IPO kind of situation, or what's the goal?
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody should do an IPO once. Nobody would do it twice, except for maybe Elon Musk.
Right.
I think this company is not going to go public because we're a benefit corporation. We exist for 2 reasons. We exist to create profit for shareholders, like every company does. But there's an equal mandate to increase the skill and diversity of trades in the communities we serve. And those 2 things are of equal importance in our corporate charter, the public benefit corporation charter, which is a really rare legal structure. And I think that there are some B Corps that are on the public stock market. But I think that doing the extra work of having to explain the difference to investors is not something that we really want to spend as much energy towards, as much as just creating both the profit and the benefit simultaneously for the communities that we're in. So we do think about exits, but the IPO would have to be a little bit different than the last one that if we did. And there's even Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup Movement. He created an organization called Long-Term Stock Exchange. Right. Which does actually sound a little bit more appealing than, say, NICE or NASDAQ. But that's in its infancy still. So it'd be interesting to see where we get to by that point.
Yeah, and I read out there somewhere that your goal is to reboot the trade education in the United States. That's a pretty amazing goal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, startup's supposed to have a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? And so reboot trade education in the United States is that. We think we can get to the point where we're training 10,000 people a year to enter the trades. And frankly, as they upskill, they have a lot of potential to either start their own businesses or specialize and go into higher income earning specializations like electrical or plumbing or something like that are more specialized than a handy person, or roofing or masonry or whatever the case may be. And so the idea that we can be an entry path into sole proprietorship, or we can be an entry path into unions, because we have a group of skilled workers that are sort of graduating from our program. We think that there's a really valuable place for us to play in that ecosystem.
That's great. I love it. Well, let's switch gears here and talk about your soon to be coming out book, Hangry. Can you share some details about Hangry? And I'd love to hear more about it and what the backbone and what you're thinking with it is.
Yeah, so Hangry is the story of founding the company, running it through the IPO, founding Grubhub, running through the IPO, and then riding my bike across the United States. And it's funny. It's sort of like it's like mostly business book, but also travel a little bit in there too. It's meant to be entertaining as much as it is to be enlightening. But I really struggled with a lot of things emotionally. There's the start where I'm making this thing and it's really hard. And it's really exciting. But then as things grow, you make compromises, personal and business wise, and those are not without emotional shrapnel, right? And so exploring what that is a little bit, and then sort of my recovery ride, and seeing the country and taking that time to realize what some of the lessons I learned during the company when I wasn't like in it was really helpful. And so I shared some of that through the book.
That's amazing. Okay, so can you share maybe some of what's your favorite part of this book?
Honestly, just the first chapter, where what it took to start the thing. There's some I think there's some interesting stories in there. There's this one point where Google Apps Google Maps didn't exist at the time, but I had to turn street addresses into latitude, longitude. So I had to write a geocoder. I actually downloaded the data from a government like database, a government FTP server, in fact. I had to download like a terabyte of data of the census data, on like, it wasn't not much faster than a dial-up connection. It took like a week. And then writing the code to turn that into a geocoder, gave me a 3-year head start on anybody else, unless they wanted to pay MapQuest, which was like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
Right.
And so there's a story about that, about like the things that are barriers, they're liabilities, right? Until you pass them, and then they're an asset because everybody else has to jump over that same hurdle.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that geocoder in itself could have been a company, right? I mean, that's not.
I know. I know. Like I made Google Maps 3 years before Google Maps came out.
Right.
And it didn't dawn on me that was a business. Like, oops.
Right. No.
Yeah.
It's harder. It's a harder direct correlation. Okay, so that's really a cool story. I love that. And maybe share, who is this book for? Who do you hope to get this book in the hands of?
I think anyone who wants to see what the startup journey is and suspects that just following the script doesn't work, right? There's this idea that there's a way to create a startup and it's go to an accelerator or maybe go on Shark Tank or whatever. And it's totally false. Like the companies that actually really succeed as startups, there's some part of the script that they've decided is wrong and they're going to do it their way. And they're saying that for a product, for a customer, and they say it about the startup journey. And I think anyone who sort of feels like maybe the script is a lie, whether you're in the normal corporate world or in the startup world, I think this book is really going to resonate with anyone that feels that way.
That's fantastic. What's the date it's coming out?
It'll be out in January of 23, so it'll be a little while. But you can pre-order it by just emailing me at preorder@mikeevans.com.
Okay, and so that's how you can get the book now. Get the pre-orders in. So if you're out there, go to mikeevans.com and you can. You said pre-order at mikeevans.com. Is how they get it.
Just send me an email, and then basically I'll send you the link as soon as I have the pre-order link.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So I think we've talked through a lot here. Do you have any final thoughts, or actually before we get started with that, final thoughts? What are your any like words of wisdom or encouragement for the 100 startups they're pitching here at Start the Year?
Yeah, I would say that one of the big things I learned at Grubhub, and one of the things I'm still learning now, is that startups that do good do better. Like being intentional about how you create value for your community and your customers and your employees creates a company that is resilient to shocks and grows and can work through the growing pains that every startup has. And so it's really important to think about what the goal of a company is beyond, I want to make a pile of money, right?
Right.
If that's your only goal, you should really just be scratching lotto tickets. Like you need to create real value for people. And those people need to be your customers and your employees and yourself and your community. It's not just about the investors. And so that's, I think, the thing that's sort of the drum I'm beating the most these days, is that intentionality really matters. That's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. If people want to get in contact with you, you mentioned your website, mikeevans.com. How do they contact information is on there. Okay, great. And it's in a code. You have to actually like puzzle it out, but it's right there on the front page. All right, keeping people on their toes. I love it. All right, thanks so much for joining us, Mike. Really appreciate it, and stay well out there. And hopefully you're enjoying Chicago, and try not to get too hangry. Yeah, I'll try. Right. I probably fail, but whatever. Thanks so much, Mike.